There was a time in my life when I was just hooked to porn, fast food, and scrolling. I was just living my life like a complete degenerate. I genuinely wanted to break free from them, and I would do so successfully for like 3 or 4 days. But then I would eventually fall back into these habits. And this cycle must have went on for 1,000 different times. I felt guilty, anxious, and mostly just tired of starting all over again. But around the year 2021, something changed. I stopped being this person. I went from someone who was a total academic failure to someone who was now working as a software engineer at Fortune 500 companies. And I became one of the best performing students in my bachelor's and my master's program. I was now lifting weights, reading books, working on my business, and training martial arts 6 days a week. In this video, I'm going to share with you the exact protocols that allowed me to break free from these bad habits. But this is not going to be one of those cute feel-good videos where I discuss some 5-minute hack to fix your life. The protocols that I shared with you are going to require you to make some serious lifestyle changes. But the results are so transformative that you would have to reintroduce yourself to people. What I noticed about myself was that after doing these bad habits for years and years, I lost my ability to say no to things. Now I just wanted pleasure as soon as I possibly could. It's because all these bad habits, pornography, scrolling, they turn your brain into a pleasure-seeking machine. And when you try and stop these bad habits, then your brain begins to scream at you, and that is why you get craving and just feel that everything else in your life is boring and there's nothing better to do. So I realized that unless and until I fix these two problems, the first one is the lack of ability to say no, and the second one is the cravings, there's no way that I can beat these bad habits permanently. After trying like 100 different things, I finally found that one thing that had tremendous results, and that is fasting. Fasting is actually when you stop eating food for a particular period of time. The type of fasting that I was doing was called OMAD. It stands for 1 meal a day. So I was basically now fasting for 23 hours, and I had like a 1-hour period in which I would consume my meal. I know this sounds really difficult, but after you do it for like 1 or 2 days, your body really adapts to this and you no longer feel hungry. What I realized was that when I was fasting, my body and my mind felt incredibly relaxed. Like I did not have those cravings to do these bad habits, because in the absence of food, your body's priorities change. Your body's no longer looking for that temporary dopamine hit from these sources. It's now more focused on just surviving, healing itself, and being focused enough to hunt. After doing this 1 meal a day protocol for 30 days, I realized that I had now completely rewired my brain and I had no cravings whatsoever, even once I stopped fasting. Also think about what exactly are you teaching yourself when you're fasting. When you're fasting, you are denying yourself something as fundamental as food. You are basically training your ability to say no. And if you can say no to something as fundamental as food, then saying no to other things like pornography, fast food, smoking, it becomes kind of easy. When I was fasting, I also noticed my self-image changing. So previously I used to think of myself as a good-for-nothing loser who had no discipline, who had no control, who was like average at best, to now thinking of myself as someone who's highly disciplined, someone who can deny himself food, someone who was doing something that 99% of the people on earth were not doing. And this isn't just placebo or bro science. Fasting actually increases something called neuroplasticity, and this is your brain's ability to rewire itself. I had now rewired my brain into that of a different man. Prior to fasting, my default response to any sort of negative emotion like stress, boredom, sadness was just to jump to one of these coping mechanisms like fast food or binge watching Netflix, just to start feeling good again. But just after a few weeks of fasting, I realized that I became much more capable of handling the negative emotions in my life. I did not feel the need to jump to a coping mechanism anymore, because this is exactly what bad habits are. Bad habits are like escape mechanisms to some dysfunctional area of your life. So instead of a person actually trying to fix these areas, that person just begins to sedate himself with these things. During the Vietnam War, a large number of US soldiers who actually went to fight there, they were now addicted to heroin. And this caused panic back in the States because they were worried what's going to happen to these people once they actually come back to the United States. But here's the shocking part. Studies found that over 95% of those who were addicted to heroin in Vietnam never touched heroin once they returned back to the United States. And this was without any rehab. It wasn't just willpower that helped them quit. it was a drastic change in environment. In Vietnam, heroin was easily accessible. All the soldiers were using it. There was a lot of pressure. But back at home, all these triggers were gone. There was no more war. There was no more stressors. And you were not surrounded by other people who were consuming heroin, so you had no immediate access to it. What I learned from this incident was that I too needed to change my environment in order to permanently break free from these bad habits. And it doesn't mean that you have to relocate to a different country. What I started doing was that I started making tiny changes to my room. I would put on different color bed sheets, different color curtains, reorient a chair or add a new lamp or remove a scenery. Making these tiny changes gives you the illusion that you are in a completely different place. And this place was no longer the place where I used to binge watch on garbage food, smoke, or watch porn. So your mind stops associating this new place with all these bad habits, and your environment no longer serves as a trigger. If you're someone who really uses their phone a lot, then consider changing the wallpaper. If your phone is on dark mode, change it to light mode, or the other way around. Let your brain start viewing your phone differently. Let it no longer identify it as this pleasure-giving thing anymore. And you're going to realize that once you have created for yourself this new environment, and then your urges to do these bad behaviors are reduced significantly. But just how changing your environment can help you reduce the urges, going back to the old environment can also cause you to relapse. Let's say you're someone who has stopped drinking and smoking for 3 years straight, but then you meet your university buddies or high school buddies who you used to like frequently smoke around, drink, and mess around with. The likelihood that you're going to relapse once you start hanging out with them again is incredibly high. There are essentially two ways of living your day-to-day life. The first way is you just wake up and start making decisions on the go. You don't really have a clearly defined idea of what you're supposed to do or what you're not supposed to do. And this is exactly how you used to live in the past. Some days I would just wake up with a lot of motivation, and on those days I would do a bunch of productive activities. But then on some days I would wake up feeling tired, unmotivated, and I would just lie on the couch and scroll through social media all day. The thing about living this way and just making decisions on the go is that you're much more likely to make bad decisions because your decision making criteria only depends on how you're feeling at the moment. The second way of living is when all your decisions are made beforehand. Now I live my life based on a routine, and in this routine I've listed down all the activities that I should be doing in the day and at what times I should be doing them. Secondly, as part of my system, I have something called a code of conduct, and these are basically a bunch of rules that pretty much tell me what are the behaviors that I should be avoiding, because doing these apparently harmless behaviors would eventually lead me to doing bad habits. Like one such rule that I have in my code of conduct is that I am not going to stay awake after 9 p.m. Previously, when I did not have this rule, I would sleep at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. binge watching Netflix, and then I would wake up the next day sleep deprived. And when you wake up sleep deprived, unable to do productive things, then you just go back to your bad habits and get those quick doses of pleasure. So this seemingly harmless thing of staying awake after 9 p.m. was leading me to these bad habits. And just having like a crystal clear rule set in place that, hey, do not stay awake after 9 p.m. is incredibly helpful. If you want to build yourself a strong foundation for discipline and finally break free from these bad habits, then make sure that you click on the link in the description and book a one-on-one call with me. Alternatively, you could DM me on Instagram. My ID is Jibreal Khan 97.